everyone, I hope you're all doing well. I'm here with the finale for my palette of the month. For this series, throughout the first part of 2018, I've been using a different palette a month, and I don't have like 12 palettes for this to like continue throughout the whole entire year. So this month is my finale. In July, I used the Urban Decay Naked 2 palette, and I really enjoyed using this palette. I kind of wanted to save it for last. This is a palette in 2017, the second part of the year. I was trying to pan this palette. My goal was sort of to start in 2017 and then use this palette throughout 2018 to try to use up the shades. But then I kind of reassessed towards the end of the year last year. I was like, I don't know if I really want to continue panning this palette and only using this palette. I kind of wanted to, you know, give some attention to some of my other palettes. I felt like, while I love the idea of panning a palette and using up all the shades, I don't want to do it at the cost of neglecting the other stuff that I had. So that's when I kind of transitioned into doing the palette of the month, and I've really enjoyed that. It's been great to sort of discover different palettes, rediscover palettes, kind of see what I like about palettes, what I don't like, and yeah, it's just been a really fun little series. So I will talk about my experience with this palette, and since it is something I was using last year, I was very familiar with it, so it's kind of fun to like revisit the palette, especially after using all the other palettes throughout the beginning of the year. So this is what the palette looks like. This shade I'm trying to hold in is Smog. This is actually from the original Naked palette. The glue is kind of came loose because I depotted it from that palette and moved it over here because I previously used up the shade here that was Booty Call. And this is my favorite shade from my Naked palette that I still have left. I've used up a lot of shades from that palette. But today I was using this shade, and I don't know if you can tell, but I hit the littlest of pan on it. So super excited about that. But this palette, I've hit pan, I guess now on 4 of the shades, which are Foxy, Smog, Suspect, and YDK. So I have used quite a bit of the shades in this palette, and this is kind of from, you know, last year too, of like hitting pan on this palette. I mean, it's not from the past month, except for Smog. But I'll go shade by shade and kind of talk about how I use it and how I like it. So the first shade here is Foxy. It's a sort of matte yellow shade. I really like that shade just all over the lid. This is one I would frequently wear for like work. If I just wanted a quick sort of look, like quick easy look, a light look, I'd go for this one. So that's great for that. The second one is Half Baked here. Now Half Baked, I don't really understand why it's in this palette. I think they were trying to do, it's mainly a cool tone palette, but maybe they're trying to do like a warmer like little area over here, because it is nice with Foxy, so I can kind of understand it, but the thing with it is it was already in the Naked palette, so I don't understand why they had to double up on a shade. I feel like they could have maybe found something similar or something completely different, just so it was more unique. So that one I've never really gravitated to. Like really I don't gravitate towards the gold eyeshadows that much, but also it being a shade that was in both palettes, it's never been my absolute favorite. It is pretty when I use it. I just frequently like overlook it, or if I'm looking at the palette, I'll gravitate towards something else and use that. But I did use that, I think maybe in 1 or 2 looks, just kind of like all over the lid. It is pretty, since that's gold, it's pretty for summer. So I did enjoy it when I use it, but again, I don't really understand why they had to put it in this palette. It would make sense if it was like, they had the perfect palette, it was missing one shade, and they had a shade that maybe in the Naked palette that they're like, that would be perfect here, but I don't see Half Baked as being like the missing shade from this palette. Like if it was missing, I don't think that this palette would be like lacking from having something else, but anyway. And then Smog, which is technically not from this palette, but I still used it in this palette of the month since I currently have it in this palette. I used this one a few times. I really like Smog. It's really pretty. It's kind of a bronzy shade. As I said, I'm wearing it today, and I did hit a little bit of pan on it, so really enjoyed that one. It's kind of the shade, if I want to do something a little bit darker, that's a shade that I like to use. I think it's super pretty. Next one is Chopper. Chopper's also very pretty. It's more coppery shade. I used that one a few times. I did use that one yesterday. I paired it with one of my Stila Glitter and Glows, the one in Kitten Karma. I'm trying to get some more use out of those products, and I thought it paired really well. And with Chopper, one of the things is that it's one of the more chunky glitter Urban Decay shades, so you get some glitter fallout out of it. So I thought it was kind of good to use it with the Stila Glitter and Glows. Like, if I'm gonna have glitter, let's just use all the glitter. So that one's really pretty, I really like. Then Tease, one of the matte shades in this palette. This palette has 3 matte shades, so Foxy, Tease, and then this black out shade at the end. This one is the main like crease color in this palette. With every look, I don't use a crease color. I find that Tease pairs better with some of these shades than others. I don't see that it's like a universal crease shade that's going to work with everything. In particular, I like using the Tease shade with YDK. I think those pair really well together, and that's mainly if I'm using Tease as a crease color, it's usually to use with YDK. But that being said, Tease I also like wearing if I'm not feeling a shimmery, glittery look and I just want to do something matte, but something a little darker than Foxy, I can just have Tease all over the lid. So I did a few looks with that. Then Snakebite. So Snakebite is this shade here. Now this is a little bit darker. I think it's similar. It's kind of in between like the Suspect shade here. That's a little bit lighter, a little bit more of a medium shade. And then Smog. But I tend to gravitate towards those other shades over Snakebite. If I want to do something a little darker like today, I tend to use something like Smog. Just think it's a really beautiful shade. If I want to do something lighter or more everyday, I would use something like Suspect. So I did use Snakebite, I think maybe just one time, but I tend to gravitate towards those other shades and kind of forget about Snakebite, to be honest. But yeah, that's that one. Then Suspect, which I got a lot of use out of. This is kind of my go-to shade like for work. I like wearing something a little, not always like super, super light. So Suspect is great for that. It's not too dark, but it gives me something like some definition. So I do like this one, and you can see I've used the most of this shade of like what I have currently in this palette. So I did get quite a bit of use out of this one. I had at the beginning of the month like shadow down here and then up here, but I was able to use up like that whole corner with a product. So this one I should have finished fairly soon, but did use that one. The next two I kind of lumped together are Pistol and Verb, these sort of gray silvery shades. When I started using these last year when I was doing my Pan That palette, I would often pair these two together. So I'd put Pistol like all over the lid and then pat Verb on top of it. So it's a really pretty look using them both together, but I also love using these separately. So if I'm wanting a more sort of smoky sort of look, I'll just put Pistol over the lid. It's super pretty. If I want something a little bit more silver, lighter gray, I'll go with Verb. So I like both of those shades. Then YDK, I think of everything in this palette, YDK is my favorite shade. If I'm not sure what to use, or I want to do something that I know is going to work or is going to be pretty, I like to go with YDK. It's just such a pretty, I would call it kind of a pewter sort of metallic shade. It's really stunning. This shade I like wearing both to work or like on the weekend. It's like kind of an anytime type of shade, which I really like. So it's definitely my favorite shade from this palette. And at the end, I have the two darker shades. So firstly, there's Busted, which is this more sort of reddish brown type of shade. Normally, if I want to do like a darker look, I'd go for something like Smog. Like that's kind of as dark as I like to go with the eyeshadow. But if I want to do something super dramatic, then I go with something like Busted. I think I used this one maybe once. It's not something that I naturally sort of gravitate towards, but when I'm doing the palette of the month, I do try to use all the shades. And it is really pretty. I think I made a really pretty look with this, but it's just not something I naturally am gravitating towards. And then finally, I have the blackout shade, the matte black at the end. With black shades, I don't really use black shades. If I'm doing the palette of the month, I'll use the black shade as like a liner. It's not something I do with every look, but if I'm making a more smoky or dark look, That's often how I'll get use out of the black shades. For me personally, I don't think blacks are necessary to have in like every single palette. But you know, I kind of wish it was like something else, something more unique. But I mean, as far as a black shade, I like it. It's good. It's a matte. So yeah, not much to say about that one. So that is how I use the palette. I did want to mention you will be seeing this palette more if you watch my Project 10 pans. I am going to be trying to pan 3 of the shades from this palette in my upcoming Project 10 pan. So there are the shades that I've hit massive pan on, being Foxy here, Suspect, and YDK. So that's kind of the next phase of me using palettes, is kind of having specific shades that I'm trying to use up in my Project 10 pans, versus like doing more palette of the month type videos or doing pan that palette. That's kind of going to be my focus probably for the rest of the year, I would imagine, to use up some of these specific shades. So definitely be on the lookout for my next Project 10 pan if you want to see my, continuation of progress with this palette with those specific shades. And yeah, that is everything. I hope you guys, if you've been watching the Palette of the Month series, I hope you've been enjoying them and hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.